Good afternoon, friends. It's a real pleasure and honor to welcome you again to this edition of Afternoons with an Author. And this is the first time we're doing a book of poetry. And we're doing this book with my young colleague and my friend, Mukul Kumar, who's been a participant at WOW. He's a civil servant and he dabbles in prose and poetry. And today we're going to be discussing and reading from his book, Catharsis, which some of you may have had the pleasure of reading. We are joined today by a very distinguished very distinguished panel, Sukrita Paul Kumar and Gopal Lahiri, both of whom are very distinguished poets in their own right. Let me tell you about Sukrita Paul Kumar. Sukrita has written several, poems, anthologies. She's taught at the University of Delhi. She's been a fellow at the Indian Institute of Advanced Studies, and her collection of poems includes Together, Oscillations, Napurna, Folds of Silence, Without Margins, and now the latest one is a collection called Poems Come Home. And she'll be in conversation with Mukul. She'll be talking to him about poetry. So welcome, Sukrita ji, to our to this edition of the Value of Words, to this afternoon with an author. It's a pleasure to welcome Gopal Lahiri also. Gopal is also bilingual poet. Uh, Gopal, I think there is a signal issue. I requesting the technical team to see, Ms. Kumar is not getting the signal to the best of my knowledge. So the technical team may kindly look into that. Gopal is a bilingual poet, critic, editor, writer, translator. He writes in both Bangla and English, and he's got several prizes and awards. And we're looking forward to his latest collection of poems. Ali's are filled with alphabet, so we looking forward to your poems. So, friends, what I'll do is I'll read to you one or two poems from Mukul. In fact, the poem which I've liked the most is My Garage, because in just 6 lines, he conveys a very profound sense of reality about what happens in a garage. May I request the technical team to again see if we can get Sukrita Paul Kumarji online. She's not being able to listen, but
Mhm.
I think
No,
you are all
yeah, now it is okay. Yeah.
okay. So let me read from this poem Garage, and after that Mukul will speak, and then both Sukrita and Gopal will be in conversation. So this poem is My Garage, and this happens to many middle class households, especially those of us who've lived in the colonies in Delhi, Bapanagar, Kakanagar, Pandara Road, and all these places where officers get a garage as part of their entitlement. So it says, the maid of my house lives in the house of my car. The maid of my house lives in the house of my car. My car exists because I have a house. Her house exists because I have it. These few lines actually convey quite a bit. But as we go along, I'll request Mukul to talk about this, and then I'll be requesting Gopal. And as soon as Sukrita ji is getting a better connection, we'll get her also to join the conversation. Over to you, Mukul.
Thank you, sir. At the outset, let me express my heartfelt thanks to you, sir, and the team of Value of Words for giving me yet again another opportunity to connect with the audience and tell them about my latest poetry collection that was published in 2020 Catharsis. So, coming to this book, I will deal with this book at two levels very succinctly. First, the title, as the name suggests, is a spontaneous release that brings instant relief. And for me, this release assumes more often than not forms of poetic form. And I find the feel of such relief superior to even the feel that comes from a common pleasure. And the poetry for me that way becomes turn out to be an instant means to derive pleasure even from pain, the creative pleasure that is just a sublime experience. Coming to the theme of Catharsis, though it is a multi-thematic collection, but when I reflect on my poetry carefully, I find that the predominant theme is existentialism. Dealing with the angst and anxieties that characterize the human existence. Man confronting a hostile universe, trying to create a purpose and meaning in his life. So often, like universe, God, religion, predestination, predetermination, free will, karma, and destiny, find a place in my poetry unconsciously. And absurdism flavors my sensibility, quite often. And I keep posing the questions, knowing fully well that they would never be answered. But in the process, those questions assume the poetic forms which afford beauty. And I'm reminded of the quote by Edgar Allan Poe, who says that poetry is a rhythmical creation of beauty. So that is how I look at this book, and um, uh, I would like to recite a poem since I'm dealing with the theme. So the theme that echoes, these sentiments. I would begin this discussion by reciting a poem, and after that, I think panelists can take over. So this poem I have chosen to recite. I see God, not religion. This particular, poem echoes absurdism, which I was talking about a little earlier. Approaching a temple, I stumble upon thieving thieves and languishing lepers, asymmetry of a reconciled paradox. How one rebels and how one suffers. I enter the temple, witness the sama of music and dance, devotees working frenziedly their ways into a blissful trance. Hopes fly thick and fast, emanating from offerings and tears, the reciprocity between faith and fullness, or propitiation out of a mortal fear. My intellect churns the reason, neither here nor there. I'm trapped in an immobilizing schism, hankering to arrive somewhere. I know not what God is. Life's light real, or darkness beyond death, or a dialectical conception surreal. No fullness, no transient trance, no cure of even your mighty mystery. I am capable of all comprehensions, but man's unfathomable asymmetry. Oh, effect that void which is equal to the flash of God, or leave me with my doubt and my religion without God. Thank you, sir. Now I leave it to the panelists to carry forward the discussions.
Yeah, so I'm sorry, but I somehow, missed it all because there was some audio problem and I couldn't get as to what poem you read. But it's just in time that I managed to log in and now I'm able to talk. But no, congratulations on this book that you have come out with. I think it's a feat to do any book in life anyway, but particularly as a story writer, as a person who was involved in fiction, and then, getting down to writing poetry, I'm very intrigued. Because I cannot write, I'm a poet, but I find it very difficult to write fiction because I find it very difficult to shift from one medium to another. And the habit of my mind is to write poetry. So, what I notice about myself, I don't know if that can be imposed on the other, but certainly I'm quite intrigued that from being a story writer, fiction writer, you have shifted to writing poetry, or you're oscillating between the two forms. And one of the advantages that I see, and before I ask you to talk on this a little bit, one of the advantages that I noticed, and I actually noticed that I was doing a blurb for your book, that your poetry seems to have two very strong elements from fiction. One is that you are sequencing ideas. It's like in a narrative, you sequence this happens and then that happens. So you seem to have that knack for working out a kind of a rationale for yourself in terms of how you do a poem. And I think that's a fantastic thing to happen because that is one of the primary things. How do you sequence lines? What comes first and what comes later? So that's one. And also you use characters, which usually one doesn't very easily use in a poem. It becomes more abstract, but you have concrete characters. So I notice very clearly that you use these two elements, and you, in your oscillation between the narrative style and the poetic style. I imagine that when you write fiction now, your poetry is going to affect you, and that is going to become poetic. How, I do not know. But tell me how conscious you are about choosing a form of writing.
Ma'am, I, in fact, let me make it clear that I started my literary journey with poetry. And poetry, when I say, I'm not very conscious about the form ultimately, which I think it takes. It's like, some emotion processing, and those as the emotion assuming some thoughts, and those thoughts ultimately finding the words. So I have never been conscious about the form, but why it takes the form, such a short form, which qualifies to become poetry, is that I feel that that particular emotion or that thought, I feel that that has completed its journey somewhere. It comes in such a form so naturally to me, that I feel that, okay, something I have been able to accomplish something, and I feel that that particular emotion has lived its life, and the thought has been ultimately translated into this poetic form. So I have never been conscious of that, and how it goes to the others, ma'am, like poets like you, or the literary critics, I'm not very sure. But about the form, I have never been conscious. It comes to me naturally.
That is fantastic, because if it comes naturally, the dictate is from inside. And Gopal, before I hand over the scene to you, one more question which is related is that poetry automatically means certain kind of interior kind of journey rather than an external journey, right? While as in fiction, it's far more external. So I noticed that the dramatic element in your poetry gets to be stronger, because you don't always think that a poem means that you take an inner journey so much. In a way, it is good for the reader because it becomes more available, it's more accessible. But do you deliberately work at that, or do you, like, for instance, I would like to read your poem and then give you an example. This is Epiphany, which I hope it has not been read already, has it? Because I
No,
missed
no,
out
no.
your point. All right. So, Epiphany, you say in this, I will attain what I want, no matter how big the hurdles dare to daunt. I have the will and wherewithal. Have I ever suffered any withdrawal? I am an ardent practitioner of Dharma and treat destiny as the function of karma. I set off with my usual elan, convinced that I am not a flash in the pan. I try but fail. I try again but only to fail. I try again and again and again, but this time all the trials go in vain. Am I wearied and is my journey terminated? I am frustrated and dejected. My philosophy is challenged and self belief jeopardized. I am plunged into entropy. Instead, is karma the function of destiny? Askance I look caught up in this anomy, left yearning for the right philosophy. Intellect again rises to the rescue, sharing the poet from the sufferer. Never is absolute a single truth or philosophy. Finally, I grow up with the epiphany. I like this poem very much, and that's why I'm really picking this up to read as well. And I do feel that here is where, in a poem like this, a certain kind of a balance comes through, where the inner and the outer, they kind of merge. So there is an element of reflection here. There is an attempt to go inwards, but at the same time, you're also retaining a certain rhyme scheme, a certain rhythm in the poem. So the poem comes together very holistically. There is an adequate element of, I would say, the sense of rhythm on the one hand, and on the other hand, a certain kind of reflective mood, a philosophic journey. I don't know whether you yourself find this to be your favorite poem, and do you think of it as different? You can probably not think of a short story that way, right?
Ma'am very rightly said, I think it is one of my favorite poems. And here I would like to just, tell something more about the theme and style of my poetry. Like this poem, I feel has confessional tones, very distinct, confessional overtones, ma'am. And I feel that many of the child character in my poem, like you were talking about the narrative, narrativity and character. Many a time the character is I, ma'am, basically, and that is what confessional poetry is about. Like experiences are so personalized. The poem is born of your own personal experiences, and the urgency to communicate takes precedence over the urgency to write anything consciously like poem. So I think this poem is, I find it to be quite confessional, and this characterizes my poetry, I think, in a very predominant manner.
Gopal?
Okay. First of all, congratulate Mukul for this your book, and you should be proud of it because your journey was earlier in the two novels which I have read, and in fact, I have reviewed one of the novel.
Yes.
So I have a fair idea of your prose style and how you build your character and like that. But poetry, of course, is a totally different ball game, and whatever I have read from your book, I think you are a poet as well. So what I feel as a poet, that poetry is like a canvas. It's a broad canvas where I feel words are dots, and poet will connect those dots to in his or own way. So here you have done in your own way. And one small poem which I would like to read before I'll ask you a question. That small poem is titled An Uncategorized Moment. It's a very short poem. The afternoon siesta leaves me adrift, yet anchored. You see the paradox, adrift, yet anchored. Visionless gazes, mindless thoughts, traveling without distance. This apparently lifeless moment affects the climax of life, where life is born of the muse life. I mean, that is wonderful. Your muse is actually life, and you want to, it's a journey to your life, and you explain in that way, and you love to have life as your muse. So, any thoughts of this particular poem, and along with this, how you approach these various themes and ideas you have put it in your poem? So, how you approach to these in a poetic form, or poetry, which we can call, because I have already, you have to mention that the voice in the poem is most of the time it's you. So I want your thoughts about this.
Thank you at the outset, Gopalji, for congratulating me and appreciating my poetry. Coming to this poem, like uncategorized moment, just a while back I was talking about the theme of my, though it is a multi-thematic collection, Catharsis, but the predominant theme, as I told you, is like existentialism, like dealing with the angst and anxieties of, living, man confronting a hostile universe and trying to create a meaning. So, life as a muse comes very naturally to me and inspires much of my poetry. And absurdism also, like I told you, favors my poetic sensibility quite often. So life, karma, just like destiny, predetermination, and free will, all such thoughts really keep churning me, and ultimately it comes out in the form of catharsis, as the title suggests. Like urgency to communicate takes over
Yeah.
any conscious thought of lending a format to my thoughts. Or I have never been conscious about neither the theme nor the nor the like elements of poetry and the poetic form. So theme also comes to me very naturally, and that reflects actually when you write something, you finish something, and then you reflect back on your writing, and then you can think in terms of categorizing that particular writing. But while writing, I have never been conscious. But when I look back, I realize that existentialism is, I think, one of the major themes of my poetry, and forms a considerable part of it.
Right. Uh, while writing, or before that, writing poetry, have you read any poets? I mean, has anybody influenced your writing, especially the poetry? Not, I'm talking of novel right now.
Oh, poetry as a craft, I have never studied. I have never been a student of literature. So that way, poetry as a craft, like what poetry is about and how it evolved over a period of time, that thing, a scientific study of poetry, you can say, I have never taken up. Poetry, of course, I have read a little more than what your curriculum, offers you, because my passion has been literature. So that way, I have, read little more than what curriculum offers. More so because at home, I think I had the ambience of, literary ambience. You can say my father has been a professor of English literature. And that way, I think I read the classical poets, like you can say Wordsworth was, major inspiration in my younger days. Wordsworth, William Blake, William
Yeah,
Blake, like sonnets of Shakespeare.
Epiphany is Wordsworth's poem. We can find this Epiphany. So that could be one of the reasons which that's your favorite poem. And that's wonderful. And before I hand over to Sukrita, Madam, I'll just one thing I'd ask you about this poetry. I mean, you have told about that absurdism is your always in your thoughts, but still side by side you have written poems on Kargil, on Kashmir, on many other things, beggar. So there are a lot of realities you look upon all those things. So how you correlate those things? I mean, once in one way you are telling that you are more of an absurdist, and other way you are still writing on. You don't miss anything in your surroundings as such. So, is there
Uh,
any contradiction or any balance? How you will explain this thing?
uh, Not contradiction, Gopalji. Like at the outset, I made it clear that it is a multi-thematic collection. And while I was saying that, while I said that existentialism characterizes my poetry, predominantly, that is why I use the word predominantly, because of course that forms the major, part of my poetry. But yes, it is about the intensity of the experience I feel. And any creative artist waits for those intense experiences that possess him, and yeah, like poetry is about like when some intense emotion possesses you, and that find thoughts, and thoughts ultimately words. So that is the journey of any, I think, literary form. So like any intense experiences around me, like in my surroundings, like any war, Kashmir. I recently wrote a poem on Russia-Ukraine war. Also, I have not dwelt upon that particular war, but war is a theme,
As in general.
and that is one of the poems that has been included in my forthcoming poetry collection, Rhythm of the Ruins. So that is how it is. I think it is more, I can say, at a very universal level, that intensity of experience, experiences matters a lot, very crucial to a poet or to any, I think, even a fiction. If you write a fiction, you have to feel inspired enough by a particular thought or by a particular story, and there has to be an urgency in the creative artist to communicate with the audience. So
Right.
unless and until that urgency is there, I think you can't can't do justice to whatever form you choose to write in.
Right. So, Sukrita Paul, ma'am.
Yeah. So, Mukul, like a couple of things that you said which are very intriguing. I mean, on the one hand, you're using terms that come directly from Western philosophy and, existentialism, a sense of absurdity. confessional poetry. On the other hand, you are saying that you haven't really loved, and you're talking about a romantic like Wordsworth and your influence at that. How come? I mean, this seems like a contradiction. It looks as though you. It's not as if you stopped with Wordsworth. There must have been a lot of reading that may have happened afterwards. I cannot imagine you using the term confessional poetry without having read people like Sylvia Plath and Adrian Rich and so on. That's one. But also within the country, if you're writing in English in India, but your identity is that of an Indian, and not just Indian, but also belonging to a particular region in India, surely there would have been influences, direct or indirect. And if I were to be, if I were to study your own poetry, and for instance, a poem like Beggar, or it comes from the soil of the country. It's not coming from the West. So maybe you haven't thought enough about your own poetry, but the point is that there is definitely a certain rooting of the poems, certain poems, which are and if they were not to be rooted in our own country, in your own situation, existentially, which doesn't mean only physically yourself being in Delhi and so on, but you belonging to a particular language group, a particular religion, a particular caste. All these things are very important in our sensibility, Indian sensibility. How even when you dismiss them, that is important. That you take a choice to dismiss them, right? So I was just imagining, I mean, what are the Indian poets that you may have read? What is it that made you get into the terrain of even the theatre of the absurd, for instance, drama of Samuel Beckett and so on? After all, there was a Badal Sarkar here, right, who was doing similar kind of writing. There were other writers at that time who were writing in the same strain, if not same, but actually finding their domain in the country, but having a similar sensibility of what we call the modernist or the postmodernist sensibility. What are your thoughts on that?
Ma'am, like when I was talking about Wordsworth, it was in the context of curriculum, and I have never been a student, of literature, so it was only up to like a +2 level that I could read, poetry, and those were the times when Wordsworth used to be, I used to love Wordsworth as a poet quite often because of nature, also because nature is another muse. Nature for any poet, I think.
No problem about that. No problem about that.
Yes, ma'am, I'm coming to that. So that is why I take my love for literature took me to some other poets also, and I delved into like poetry, though not the scientific in a very scientific way, but the poetry from others. And I read quite some poetry from Sylvia Plath, and she inspired me a lot because I found her poetry echoing my sentiments. I was talking about the confessional poetry, like her poem, Ma'am Daddy, and Lady Lazarus. Like these two poems left a very deep impression on my sensibility. So, and philosophy, ma'am, like I was talking about absurdism and I talked about existentialism. So, philosophy, I can say when I look back again at my poetry, that why I am talking about existentialism and absurdism, that is philosophy, ma'am. And philosophy is I can say that underlines my writings in a very pronounced manner. And I read quite some philosophy during this literary journey, especially after I took to writing fiction. Both of my fictions, I can say, have very distinct philosophical flavor. So I think I digged into philosophy and poetry also, ma'am, like postmodern, poetry. Sylvia Plath, I'm really inspired by her, I must say, in fact. Though I have never tried to consciously copy any particular poet, but there are certain poets whose writings, whose poems, whose creations leave a very deep impression upon your sensibility. She is definitely one. And among the modern poets like W.B. Yeats, William Butler Yeats also, I think his poetry also, I think, impressed me a lot. Though I have not read, I am making it very clear that it's like, I can say that I'm an amateur as well as talking about poetry in a very scientific way is concerned. It comes to me naturally, and at the outset, I'm a creative artist. I just, I just allow a particular emotion to find a passage through me, particular thoughts to get translated into words, and ultimately I pen it down on the paper. That is how it is, ma'am.
Excellent. But would you like to talk a little bit about the Indian poetry scene? How do you place yourself, or what are the Indian poets that you may have read?
Indian
And
Indian
what
poets,
influences that you have had?
just as a part of the curriculum, like Sarojini Naidu, Rabindranath Tagore, and Kamala Das, of course. So that is how it is. After that, I never followed as such, very passionately. I can say that during this literary journey, one poet whom I really followed is Sylvia Plath, ma'am. And that is why I was talking about confessional poetry. When your mind is troubled, and there is an urgency to, express, communicate, and that urgency takes over anything else, any conscious thought about the literary forms you are choosing to write in.
Yeah, excellent. So I would, do you mind if I read your poem, The Beggar? Shall I read
Beggar,
that
ma'am.
poem?
Yes,
Yeah.
Beggar,
So,
in your foreword, I have been blessed by your foreword for my book. And Beggar, I think you have admired a lot, ma'am. Beggar, the poem. So
yeah,
you want me
yeah.
to read that poem?
So, yeah, you read it. That will be best. Yes.
I think, ma'am, it is your privilege. If you read it, I will feel better, ma'am.
All right, let me read it. All right. So there you go. The beggar. A beggar, limbless, armless, the fragments barely clad, the begging bowl tied to the loose end of an arm, rolls over the pathway along, the garments short and stomachs out, some cacophonous score which is getting drowned into the clatter of stones raining into his empty bowl. It's a beautiful poem. What I like about this poem is that it's very condensed. And it's so condensed that in few words you are saying a lot, because not only are you drawing a picture of a beggar, but a whole scene of not pity, but something which produces sounds, smells. There's something tactical about it. You feel the experience. And some of the things that you were talking about, whether it is to do with the existential contact with the beggar, it's almost like that. You put yourself into that situation and identify so much that the reader gets it. The reader is also getting into it. And that is done in a very simple way. There isn't a play of words. It's actually straightforward expression and honest expression. That's why I like this poem. Congratulations
Thank you.
for writing a very good poem like that.
And this poem, ma'am, this poem I wrote when I was very young. That is somewhere, if I can recall it correctly, it was the year must be 2001 and 2, and I was posted as a very young officer in Bhopal, ma'am. And it was again born of a real sight, ma'am, that impinged upon my sensibility. And this poem came out instantaneously. And then I had those were the time, ma'am, just when online, I think, submission of poetry was gradually, I think, becoming popular. I sent it, and it was widely appreciated at the various, literary fora, ma'am, then also.
I particularly like the fact that you use cacophony on the one hand. It's cacophony. And on the other hand, you see how meaningful that sound of the other sounds of the beggar, how they kind of are juxtaposed with each other and go to create a very serious silence. I like that. The noise that is produced is actually leading to silence.
Yeah, at the end, it's almost like a crescendo.
Here,
Yeah.
when I look back at this poem, I find that the last line, the symbol, how symbol is and imagery is crucial to poetry. This poem amply, reveals that the clatter of stones raining into his empty ball is like symbolizes the lack of compassion, lack of compassion.
Yes. Yes.
Yes, ma'am.
Bahut acha. Very good.
Thank you.
Over to you, Gopal.
Thanks. Actually, right now I'll be talking about a bit of your words and language. You know, Seamus Heaney, a famous poet, he has written one that if you have the words, there is always a chance that we'll find a way. And I will quote one of your poem, Shadow. Yeah, just last two lines, because you could understand whether how you have utilized this particular word. Finds me oscillating along a non-existent hypotenuse. So these words, this hypotenuse, are you consciously writing, or you have a background of this, and how do you feel? And how you feel that how words can be used to build some images? So this is one of my points that I want to ask you.
I'm very happy that I think this poem so far hasn't been talked about at any literary forum. I'm really happy that it has been picked out by you, Gopalji. Yes, hypotenuse actually again an observation, like when you walk, your shadow is flickering flat beneath, and
Yeah,
the perception of your shadow means that somewhere that depicts the inward journey. As
right,
Ram was just sitting a while back, like poetry is about the inward journey. So when my own perception about myself, that shadow symbolizes my own perception about myself and how I behave as a public self, and that shadow symbolizes my inner self, that finer self, that deeper self, and how I am trying to find a connect between the two, and that is why I have used the word hypotenuse. Like hypotenuse, that is a mathematical,
yeah, yeah.
expression. Like but it's a right,
Angle
angle.
triangle and the opposite side. Yeah.
Yeah, it is a right angle. You are walking, your shadow is flickering flat beneath, and you are trying to find a connect. And hypotenuse is the only way in which these two dimensions can be connected.
Right,
So this
right.
is really I'm really happy as a creative artist with this particular usage, in this particular poem. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So in a way, what I can understand that even though you are telling that the emotions, whatever it comes, you write on that. But even for particular this poem, you have already written this in your brain. I'm pretty sure because whatever explanation you have given. So in subconscious, you have already thought about this, and then you started writing and write it because your first two lines is also very important. My contour has slipped out of me to flicker flat on the earth. I mean, you are going to describe certain things, which you ultimately, finally, you come to those final two lines. So this is wonderful. I really like this.
Thank
You
you.
want to tell
Thanks.
anything?
No,
Uh,
I was just mentioning, that is the, like, my contour has slipped out of me to, flicker flat on the earth. Like every time when you walk, you are not conscious of your shadow.
right,
So that,
right.
that
At
is
that
where
point,
yeah, that is where I think that is the point where creative impulse, you are caught up in that creative impulse, and then the inward journey starts. And that is, I
right.
think, that is the way a creative artist sensibility or mind or whatever you say that functions in this way only. That those are the moments of self-realization, that time when inward journey begins. So that is how this poem has come out.
Right. And you are almost
Yeah, but the
inhabiting
beauty,
what you are telling. Yeah. Yes,
yeah,
ma'am.
Gopal, I think what you raised this beautiful point about, hypotenuse and how the usage
Mhm.
has been made in this poem. I think
Mhm.
the beauty of this particular poem lies in the fact that it's a it's a philosophic journey in
Yeah.
one sense as you move around in the poem, but about a very but the projection is very mathematical and concrete, right?
Right.
It's so
Yes.
concrete. You can see
Mhm.
the visual. And that's the beauty because the concrete is actually presenting a very abstract idea of the shadow and your
Yeah.
self consciousness about the shadow.
Yeah.
So
Yes.
the concrete and the abstract being put together, I think that's well done.
Yes. Yes. And another short poem, I'll just read Aquarium. There also, you have mentioned in between that the entire sea squeezed into it, into the aquarium. It is a specimen to my keen aesthetic sense and the size of my heart. So I just inquired about the last line and the size of my heart. how you conclude this poem, Aquarium, with this size of my heart. This is just one of my
I
thoughts.
think again, Gopalji, this poem is very dear to my heart. And as if you can recall, I think you reviewed my novels.
Yeah, yes. I can't hear.
Can't hear.
Can't hear.
Can't hear.
We can't hear.
Can't hear you.
Unmute, please. Now again. Can you answer that? No, it is. We can't hear.
No, his voice has gone.
Voice has gone.
No, I think then you continue the conversation, the two of you, generally on
Yeah,
English
yeah.
poetry and what is happening.
Yeah.
And as soon as Mukul can get back into it, we
Yeah.
So in fact, both of you
So-
were talking about contemporary Indian, contemporary young poets in India. So could you like to share with us, with some of our viewers, who, in your opinion, are some of the younger people who you find a lot of promise insofar as Indian writers in English poetry are concerned?
Yeah, Gopal, would you like to go first, or do you want me to speak?
I can only say about it because it's a vast subject, but I'll talk about a very young one or two poets, like which recently I'm reading. One is a girl, Nikita Parekh. Sukrita, you must have heard her name.
Yes.
She is very, very promising in the sense that she has that beautiful, what we can say that the ordering of her thoughts into the poem, that is very, very beautiful and very matured in the sense that she is quite young. She's still studying. So one of them is Nikita. Then another fellow poet is Mihir Chitre. He's also a very good poem. He's from Maharashtra. He got some, I think, Sahitya Academy Youth Poet Award also. So these 2-3 poets which I can right now drop their name. And Sukrita ji, you can continue about this.
Yeah, I would like to tell you, and think, of course, Gopal, you would be aware of this, but we bring out, Vinita Agrawal and I, this is the second year we brought out the yearbook of Indian poetry in English. The second volume is getting launched, now in Bangalore it's got launched, Bangalore Literary Festival, and and we are really taking it around because here we got, Sanjeev ji, your question was about the young poets. Do you know we got 700 submissions of Indians writing in English, poetry writing in English. And out of these 700 submissions, Vinita and I selected, with the help of a committee of poets, we selected 140 and brought out this book which is called the yearbook. Every year we plan to do it. Now this is where you see the very selected young and old poets, and the scene becomes very clear. So how many names? My God, there's such good, so well written poetry. For instance, you mentioned a couple of them, Gopal. If I were to add, what about Vasudhara Roy?
What about Parveen Saqib?
What about
Parveen?
Beautiful?
Yeah, there are plenty of
many of them writing today, and all that is lacking is a certain kind of sense of tradition that the critics need to put together. That's what we require, that the critics need to put it together. And if you were to look at the yearbook, you would immediately see last year and this year, they are culled out poems, culled out to the best of our ability, and also to the ability of the 5 other people who helped us select anonymously. So the poetry scene is very, very vibrant, and particularly in English, but not just in English, of course. There is a lot of poetry happening in all languages. In fact, it's difficult to accommodate it. But we need more readers. We need these books to sell. We need the market to be buzzing with poetry, so that publishers are ready to publish. And there are obviously festivals are helping.
Thank you so much. Thank you for saying that festivals are helping. And I'll also like to mention two, recent collections. One is Noise Cancellation by Jilam Chatraj. I think
Yeah.
that
Yes.
was a very nice
Yes.
collection of poems which we came across in the course of our
Right.
festival. And there's another book which narrowly missed out this year on being shortlisted. This is Tishani Doshi's A God at the Door.
Yes.
This
Yeah,
is
yeah, yeah.
Yes.
That's excellent.
Harper. So these
Yeah.
are some.
Yeah.
In fact, I quite agree with you that the number of books that are written, and obviously there's a limit to the number of books that can be selected and the number of
Yeah.
books that can be
Yes.
discussed. So there is a new concept. It's called the time poverty. That amongst other poverties that we have, there's also something called time poverty, because there's a
Yeah.
limited amount of
Yes.
time, and we don't have everything. Back, Mukul, glad that you are back. Sorry you were due to leave for some time.
Yeah, I had
but,
lost connection, sir. Then I connected again on through my mobile.
Don't worry. This happens. But the good thing is that because of all this, we are still being able to connect. I'll also take this opportunity of
Yes.
thanking the National Digital Library of India, our partners, because the maximum relay, the number of people who are getting to listen to us, is thanks to the National Digital Library of India, which is based out of IIT Kharagpur. And I would urge all those who are not still affiliated to NDLI to join them, because then you can get any book that you want, all books that are published in India, but even books that are published abroad, you can get them through the NDLI. But back to you, Sukrita ji and Gopal Lahiri.
Yeah.
So Mukulji, you were
Thank
telling
you.
certain things, and then we lost connection.
Yeah.
About
I
the
think
poem we are discussing
we-
about the poem Aquarium. Yeah.
Aquarium. I think if you are able to recall, I used this poem in my fiction also, Seduction by Truth.
Yeah,
and
yeah,
you
that's
were,
what
and you were reflecting on this last line, like the size of my heart. So
Yeah.
basically, this poem depicts the conflict between beauty and the human value. Like you are
Nice.
feeling admiring the beauty when fishes are totally confined to an aquarium, to an aquarium, and you are marveling the beauty of the whole thing. But at the same time, I think that compassion hits you somewhere while you are admiring the beauty, that okay, you feel the empathy. That particular side arouses the empathy for those fishes, I think, who have ceased to like find the freedom and roam into in the sea, and they are here in the aquarium confined to a very small place. So this is the perspective. This is the perspective of empathy which the creative artist is trying to bring to the entire scene, and that is how it depicts the conflict between the beauty and the human value.
Right. And another thing is, you have already written in this collection about writer's block. So I am a bit surprised that this is your first book of poem, and you started writing a poem on writer's block. I mean, is there any particular reason of writing this poem, or just like the flow, you have suddenly you feel certain?
I was talking about catharsis. I was reflecting on this title and how I was telling you that your emotion finds thoughts and thoughts find words. And many a time it happens that some emotion keeps churning you for long and you are not able to write. So that is how this poem came out of that particular experience. That many a time you try to translate that emotion into some literary form and you are not able to do it, and how a writer has to wait for the divine inspiration or some, I think, external stimuli that comes and that possesses the artist, and one is able to write one wants to. So this poem reflects that sensibility, and
Right.
a writer as a person is shown to be a very weak individual, weak in the sense that powerless individual, that unless and until that inspiration possesses you, you can't lend words to your emotions and thoughts.
Right. That some poet believe that poetry, once you write a poem, you are leaving that, and then again you started writing a new poem and new thoughts come. So do you believe that just like writing, that once you write, you just, move on to another domain and you write certain things? Or you think that, no, I can again come back to my earlier poems, earlier thoughts, and I'll write that. So what is your thought about this?
Poetry, I must confess, that is not something like once I write maximum, I think a couple of times I visit till I feel that I have been able to finish, though there never comes a point when you feel that you have to abandon, your writing. You can't finish it up to your satisfaction. Uh, Poetry, but let me confess, I don't revisit, quite often, very frequently, because, I revisit my poetry when it comes to, producing a collection, like planning to, publish a collection. That is the time when you revisit and edit it. Fiction is something very different, because I can say, I can bring out that distinction, that fiction is something which, demands more rigor in terms of editing and re-editing, and that, requires so many visits, even in one spell. So poetry, I think, is quite different that way.
And do you think that you can again go back to fiction and write that after writing these poetry books, or you will write poetry on and on and on?
I think it is so, I think unconsciously it is happening, that both are, I think I am able to, with quite some felicity, I am able to switch these two genres. But fiction, of course, I'm telling you very frankly that if any creative artist is supposed to do justice to one's craft, you have to wait for some inspiration, some such intense experience that should possess you, and you have to feel that urgency to communicate. Unless and until that is there, I don't think you can write something. So I think it's happening at this moment. Fiction, of course, new fiction I have not been able to write for last 3 years almost. All of my writings, I think earlier writings I have been using, and another fiction of mine is in the pipeline. But again, that had been written way back in 2019. So for the last 2-3 years, I have not been able to, I have not started writing any fiction, though I'm planning one. But poetry is something which is, I think, happening intermittently. So I'm really happy as a creative artist that I'm not roaming in a very blank space. Something or the other is happening.
Oh, that's
But
wonderful.
Mukul, I personally believe that, when your poetry and your fiction, when they come together, that's when you will really enjoy yourself even more. Because you see, what is happening is that we have started drawing a line so much between poetry and prose, which to my, I'm not very fond of doing that myself, because that's why I was saying that because you're writing both, because you've written both, perhaps there will come a time when you would want to merge, poetry with your prose. And that's when it really acquires, the writing acquires a certain height, a certain altitude it acquires. I really believe that the vision that one has of life as a whole, it contains both poetry and these are artificial barriers. There are artificial borders that we have created. Ultimately, very good fiction is poetic, and very good poetry is fiction. Both are looking for truth.
I
And
think
what is that
absolutely.
truth? It might change.
I must say that, thank you so much for pointing out that this is an absolutely unnecessary binary which has been created between prose and poetry. All good, and I think you put it across so well. And as Mukul has pointed out, that he will soon be getting into some fiction. He'll be writing poetry, so it's actually wonderful. So thank you very much. We still have 5 more minutes to go. Today the weather is very bad, and therefore the we're not being able to connect to our NDLI listeners. We're not being able to get that question answer format, though we've had many smiley faces on the on the deck, but we've not really been able to pose questions. But one last question from both of you, and then I'll thank Mukul and both of you, because we will have to close at 4 o'clock, though it's a very interesting conversation. So maybe Gopalji, you can ask your last question.
Yeah, Mukul, my last question is not about that, but this book, but what about writing in other language, like in Hindi? Have you any plan in future that you will be writing in some other than English? Any plan?
I am not writing personally, but my first fiction, As Boys Become Men, is already undergoing translation in Hindi. So Hindi is happening to me, but I am not penning anything in Hindi. I'm at this juncture, I think I'm completely confined to, restricted to English as the medium of my expression.
Right. Sukrita ji, you can ask.
See, I don't want to ask anything. I think one should just get into silence of poetry, which poetry is meant to create. So I think we should just share our silences and be done with it. If your poetry has had any impact, it's through poems like Shadows, poems like Shadow, or Epiphany, or Beggar. And the impact is that of really silence and reflection. And if that doesn't happen, poetry doesn't happen. So I am just, what Samuel Beckett used to say, I am trying to eliminate and edit words as much as possible from writing. So maybe I will come to a point when I would just create, what is that word when you have minds, just mind, everything through a mind. Let the silence speak. Thank you, Sanjeev ji, so much for having given us the opportunity to voice out a few thoughts so uninhibitedly.
Right.
Thank you, Mukul. Thank you, Gopal.
Thank you, Sukrita.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I will just I will conclude my discourse with my sincere and heartfelt thanks to Dr. Sanjeev Chopra sir, Madam Sukrita Paul and Gopal Lahiri ji for gracing the occasion.
Thank you.
This is a huge encouragement for me that my book is being talked about, and nothing can be more satisfying for a writer. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Well, that was my job to thank all of you, but you've done it for me. But, I think it's been a lovely conversation. It's a conversation because it went beyond Catharsis. It went beyond the scope. It went beyond this book. It was a very nice discussion on poetry, on life, on silences, on writings in English, and how all of us in India, and it was so nice to hear from Sukrita ji that there are 700 poets who are trying to, write in English. And these are the 700 poets who stepped out. This means there must be at least 70,000 who are trying to write. And not just in English, but in all languages of this country. And what we celebrate in the value of words is the word. The word is actually the one great thing, shabd, akshar, the one thing which will always be. So I think the word and akshar and value of words and all of us together, and it's been at least in Dehradun, it's been raining, and I'm so glad, that we couldn't lose. All of us didn't lose connection at the same time. You see, we lost connection at some time. Sometimes Mukul lost come to live, but on the whole, we were able to sustain this. The weather gods have been kind. So thank you all very much. Thank you,
And Sanjeev ji, poetry connects. Poetry connects.
And Sanjeev ji, one quote from Rumi: "Raise your words, not your voice. It is rain that grows flowers, not thunder."
Very nice. Very nice. So thank you very much. We'd like to thank Garhwal Post, Tribes India, Fair Observer, Technopack, Green Panel, Coal India, NEFED, and all those who have helped us in getting this together. And thank you very much, India, and of course to Mukul, Gopal, and Sukrita Paul Kumar. Till we meet again. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, everyone.
Dr. Sanjeev. Thank you, everyone.